I'm Monica Malpass on Inside Story. Should we hike real estate taxes in Philadelphia or cut the budget to make ends meet? Inside Story is now. Good morning and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Monica Malpass. Let's meet our insiders this week. They are A.J. Raju, attorney and businessman. Welcome back. Glad to have you. Dom Giordano, radio talk show host. Always nice to see you, Dom.
Thanks, Monica.
Donna Gentile O'Donnell, nonprofit executive. Good morning to you, Donna.
Monica.
And Christine Flowers, attorney and journalist. Great to see you again, Chris.
Morning, Monica.
Hope everybody's doing well. Let's talk about the city council budget hearings and several proposals by different council people about how to get all the line item budget items in there, how to not ask for more taxes, real estate in particular, among others, and also how to meet the needs. That's the real point here, schools and otherwise. If you ask City Councilwoman Helen Jim, she would like to cut the 10-year tax abatement to 5 years, half of that. Councilman David O would like to save 110 to 171 million by maybe not doing the proposed spending that Jim Kinney, the mayor, is proposing. Councilman Alan Don wants a 15% reduction in the prison budget, which they are having fewer prisoners, so that might be part of the solution. And others, Councilwoman Cindy Bass saying, look, maybe have cutting the prison budget as well over the next 5 years, but also other areas not so much, totaling 670 million over 5 years rather. Among those choices, do you like some better than others?
Well, it's a sign of the apocalypse. Philadelphia City Council wanting to cut taxes. And Helen Jim and I are about as far as we could put on the set apart, but I don't agree with this abatement stuff. I think she's sound on that. We have businesses that are good businesses here. They never get any benefit. That stuff is not good. I like Cindy Bass a bit in this. I'm a little bit skeptical of cutting too much on the prisons. This idea that we can cut there because maybe Larry Krasner is not going to be sending as many people there or something like that. That part is a little bit dangerous, but the cutting instinct is exactly what they ought to be doing.
Already, though, the prison population is lower, so that would make sense to save that money and put it somewhere else, perhaps.
I agree. Well, I agree with Dom. I mean, this is just a complete cultural shift that they're actually looking at the taxpayers of Philadelphia and saying, well, maybe we should give them a break and maybe we should, take care of our own house. I am a little troubled, though, about the idea that one of the major cuts would be in the prisons. It really depends on where you're going to be cutting the money. And even though we do have a decreased prison population, I don't want to put the cart before the horse in the sense that, well, we're going to decrease the monies in the hopes that we're going to have a decreasing prison population. It's kind of like it's wishful thinking, but I do agree that is that's wonderful. The tax abatement, absolutely, that hasn't helped anyone except for the investors, and I don't really think it's brought anything to the city of Philadelphia. So I agree with Dom, and I agree with Helen Jim, and
miracles do happen. The prisons, though, you do have to look at safety and security. So if you cut too deeply, now you're risking safety issues.
So Helen Jim's proposal is going to save $8 million at most. Those are the numbers that the mayor's administration have come up with. And while I think the mayor and his administration are open to conversations about how to rebalance, the other thing that he points out is that, we passed a city charter change in which we said we're going to take responsibility for the schools. And there's no money coming from Harrisburg, and there's no reason to believe anything very substantial is going to come out of Washington. So, and the mayor talks passionately about this. He talks about the fact that poor kids that don't get an education are doomed to poverty for their lives, because if they don't get a real chance, it's not happening. But second, the dynamic of the city is moving toward the millennials, the 30 to 35-year-old folks who are loving living in the city and who need to be able to send their kids to good schools. And if you do an analysis of Philadelphia's real estate taxes compared to the suburban real estate taxes, where the schools are good, the suburban real estate taxes are considerably more. And I've had friends who lived in the suburbs who moved to the city because they had always planned to send their kids to private schools. So for them, moving to the city was actually a tax break on real estate
Right.
versus living in the suburbs, paying a high real estate tax and having good schools. I think that it's going to be a really interesting dynamic to watch, because this is a mayor who comes out of city council. He understands the dynamic of council.
But AJ, real estate taxes are a real area of sensitivity because they've gone up, up, and you can't keep increasing real estate taxes, but the city does need money to cover its budget items, including schools. So where's the give? You can't have layoffs.
Right, so can I approach it from a different angle? You know, Abe Lincoln said, if you give me 6 years to chop down a tree, I'll spend the first 4 years sharpening the axe, right? So what are we doing to sharpen the axe? Another stat, 4 companies, Apple, Facebook, Google, and Amazon, collectively have a market capitalization output greater than all countries in the world, with the exception of 6 countries, US, UK, China, Japan, and Germany. Right? So what are we doing to attract large companies that have good GDP output in this city? What are we doing to train the next generation of students? What are we doing
work for those companies?
What are we doing to sharpen the axe to make Philadelphia attractive? If you think this is what it is, then maybe it is the answer, but I haven't seen anything that attracts us and makes us a magnet.
Don't you have to start in small doses, though? A bite here and a bite. You can't really reinvent the wheel.
Since how long? Since 1965. Since we had white flight, industrial revolution,
right?
And since we had companies go. Look at a snapshot of what Philadelphia has been, and since '65 to now, the same debate has been going on in the city. Look at the Inquirer. What is a small dose? Look at this, around the same time, from '65 till now, look what happened in Silicon Valley, Seattle, Boston, Austin, Houston. They're doing it differently. Is it possible that either we're not good at this, or there's a conspiracy theory that a handful of us who have power want it this way because it preserves our power and our status quo?
Right. Interesting debate. All right, and meantime, we're talking about Rebuild, which is a project all across the state of Pennsylvania to rebuild schools, and specifically in Philadelphia, rec centers that are dilapidated. Some of the money in the next couple of weeks could be approved. It's going to feature 45% minority and women-owned businesses in the construction end of it, but they're having a tough time meeting that number because currently surveys show only about 31% are going to minorities and women-owned in 500 current city projects. How do you get that number in the first place? Because many of the trades, specifically some of the unions, are not giving the information about who their subs are.
Well, right there is the answer, and I'm with City Council again, a shocker on this. And I think these unions, we do know that a great number of them, these men usually, have moved outside the city. And that's an issue with this whole thing when they get this largesse toward the recreation center. And Jim Kenney is of both worlds.
Right.
He wants to be inclusive toward minorities, but he and Johnny Doc, that's at a higher level relationship. And it seems to me that the unions, to the point, Public Citizen this week showed that they're not even giving the number to make a characterization about this, Monica. So how can you get to it when we don't know where we are?
Can't even have, it's a non-starter. So Johnny Doc did sign a memo of understanding with the mayor saying that they would be on board with the 45% minority and women-owned as part of the collective effort.
Where's the proof, though?
There you go.
Well, it's also micro, I'm sorry, micro as opposed to just the macro. When you're looking at, first of all, they're below the percentage of numbers that they should be at. But also, when you look at the types of jobs that are being given to minorities, as was indicated in the Philadelphia Citizen, more of the unskilled, lower wage jobs are going to the minority. So you have, within a minority, you have an even smaller slice and percentage of minorities getting the higher skilled jobs which they're, qualified for. So that's also a problem, and it doesn't, so even the lower percentage of minorities being included doesn't accurately reflect how many minorities are being employed in more advantageous positions.
Right,
That's
and is
problem.
that a vicious circle of because they don't have the skills, so they are given the non-skilled jobs, at least as a job, or is it because they're being kept out because they're minorities and women? That's the key question.
So a couple of data points. I think it's useful to just do a little bit of a look back. Under John Street's administration, the building trades, Pat Gillespie was the leader of the trades at the time. John Doherty was key in negotiating this. They took in 1,200 PHA housing residents into apprentice programs. Under and then in a subsequent go around, they took an additional 600 out of Philadelphia public schools, and these are minority-based programs. So
and were those successful programs?
There was mixed success depending on which trade they apprenticed to. One of the big challenges for some of these folks coming in was their ability to read. And so they were reading at 4th and 5th grade levels as high school graduates. So we're back to the circle of how do we make sure that our graduates are sufficiently numerate and literate to be able to take the higher skill jobs. So I think that to the extent to which there is selective fact finding with respect to the building trades, I think that's an important consideration. I also want to point out that in this first round of rebuild, the original plan, if it had been fully executed, it's a $600 million plan, assuming that they had gotten all the money. They've got $20 million. So we're really, right now, we're talking about 50 to 100 jobs. Right. That's all. So. And the one other point that I would make is the challenges associated that have been verbalized by some members of council and the council president on the subject of the signing. You know, there's one signature, and how do you bind everybody else? In every large organization, there is a lead signatory. In every major nonprofit, every university, every company, there's a lead signatory, and that signature represents.
Right. So that's not uncommon.
Yeah, it's very common. And there were 30 people in the room when these things get negotiated. There
so
were
this
10
has
amendments.
Been a 47-year-long debate and lawsuit. It started in 1971 that not enough minorities and women are being included in a city that has a majority of minority inhabitants and many women. The federal lawsuit did take over the running of it, and a court did agree with the minorities. They were being left out and started monitoring. And the best years were the late 80s. So we are 30 years out now from when the best inclusion was done. How do we get back to being more inclusive?
Again, I'll go back to the original point. Who's at the table? The people at the table make the decisions. And then if you have folks who are taking just a small chip but not negotiating long term, well, then you're going to see this 47 years later, same exact issue. You know, a handful gesture of let's do apprentice program but not really seeing any result 10 years later. By that time, the old guys are gone. Now we start the debate fresh again. This is Groundhog's Day.
Right.
Okay, we know what's going on. There are a handful of people. By the way, it's not a white or black issue. Black leadership also needs to be held accountable. What are they doing to make sure that when they're at the table, they are making sure that it filters through to the neighborhoods? It's not a white or black issue. It's actually a status, economic issue.
Yes,
it's a class issue. Our lower middle class folks don't have representation.
That's right.
Because there are no lobby groups for them.
Right. I agree with
okay, and by the way, they're not active and they're not engaged. They don't have power.
Monica, I see it a little bit differently. I think a lot of these jobs are kind of legacy jobs. You've had guys that have been in there forever. They're sons now, and they were white at one point, and they are now. And this is a coalition that's held together by that power base. And then over here, the changing face of Philadelphia, supporters of the Democrat Party. And I think Philadelphia City Council is correct in saying if we're going to have this public money toward this, then we are going to put down some rules that maybe you wouldn't see in the private sector.
Can I just say very quickly, can I reinforce, and I can't say it over and over again, what AJ said is so important. It is about, I mean, to a certain extent, it's about demographics, about, you know, race and gender, but it's about money. It's about economic opportunity. It's about class. And Philadelphia has always had a strong class divide, and so I think that that's really key to the problem.
On top of that, and from a race standpoint, there's a legacy
well, it's
of
inextricable with race.
Right, and then so for example, if you're a white family, you have a home, you give that to your kid. The kid starts off at a much higher plateau than a Latino family or a black family, right? So it is about how you're starting the race already 300 yards behind every generation.
Well, I think particularly inside the union, that was my point. That's where this starts. These jobs are handed down.
Sure, the granddad did it, now the dad.
That's it, exactly.
That's why you can't get a home. You know, if you're of a certain ethnicity, you can't.
Representation.
Right.
So, you know,
you're shackled at the beginning of the race.
There are companies called the unicorns. These are VC-backed companies, not public, but they're $1 billion or more. Okay, they're called unicorns. There are 134 unicorns in the United States. Of them, only 14 have women co-founders. Now you tell me what the vicious cycle would be about women in power.
Well, that's a whole show.
Globally, the 239 unicorns, only 23. So it's not a local issue, it's a national. So who's at the table they will make the decision, and you will suffer the consequences for generations.
Right. All right, let's move on and talk about in Harrisburg. Democrats and Republicans might actually pass a budget and get along because it's budget season and they need each other, right? So this would be nice if we could get this going on a roll. And Governor Tom Wolf's budget does feature more money for education, elder care, state police, and natural gas severance fees. Democrats aren't saying that they're going to get all their wishes, but at least some of them say, hey, if you limit some of the spending, then you could actually get it all done. Do you believe it's going to happen?
I think it's much more likely to happen this year than any other year. The governor, I think, is well positioned to move the budget. I think there's what's really interesting to me is some of the other things that are connecting the whole phenomena of changing voter registration so that we can have open primaries. So there's a new kind of jive in Harrisburg about bipartisanship on that issue, and I think it's actually laying down a foundation for more collegiality and opportunity to lock things down.
I see that as insiders, this whole thing. You ought to vote in the primary that you're registered for the club, Republican or Democrat. So I think that premise is faulty, but I think it's electoral politics.
Right.
They want to get this done. They want to get out of Harrisburg and they want to go back and run. I think they'll get it done.
Okay, we're going to take a break. Inside Story continues right after this. Stick around.